everybody. Thank you very much for coming. I'm going to talk a bit about sustainable high-density neighborhoods. The conference theme is sustainable vertical urbanism. And when I do a search for sustainable tall buildings on Google with images, this is mostly what I end up with, which is a number of strange forms, some windmills, a lot of greenery. But the sad truth is that even if we do a building at net zero, that's still just not making anything worse. It's not making anything better. And what we need to do is think about sustainable high density as at a city scale, at a larger scale, not just at the scale of a building. So I'm going to start with something which might seem slightly unrelated. This is an image many of you may know. It's Mumbai. It's the slums of Mumbai. Reaching some of the newer buildings. The reason that I show this is I'm going to put what I'm talking about mostly in the context of Canadian neighborhoods, specifically Toronto. And many people don't know, but India is growing at the same rate as Canada. So that's about 1.3%. So this kind of, obviously there's a huge difference of actual population growth. Sorry, that's interfering with my face. But the incremental growth is about the same. China, by the way, is at 0.5% per year of growth. So I thought I'll start with a bit of contextual information. What's happening in the north? This sort of, I like the cliche slide of the sort of man, that's I think what everybody thinks of as Canada. And beyond is the skyline of Toronto. And it's, any of you who've been there recently will know that this is actually not quite that recent. There's a lot more towers there than there used to be. And most of that growth is residential growth. And that's specifically the context of what I'm going to talk about, because when we're here at this conference, we spend a lot of time talking about office buildings, commercial buildings, but about 90% of building in cities is residential building. And if any of you have been, like I was yesterday or the day before, out to the edge of Shanghai, you'll see endless amounts of high-density towers lined up with very little space in between them of quality. So this is a neighborhood. This is a Toronto neighborhood. Toronto is known as a city of neighborhoods. There's 164 of them, and most of them look something like this. But Toronto, we were just discussing this before this started, Toronto is also a high-rise city. So it has a very strange duality. And in fact, until recently, Toronto was leading North America in high-rise construction. So I think this slide at the bottom here is from last year or the year before, but you can see how far ahead Toronto is in terms of new tall buildings under construction. And that adds up to New York, Chicago, Miami, Boston, all combined were less than Toronto. And Toronto was already a high-rise city. It was already had twice as many tall buildings as Chicago, which is sort of known as the birthplace of the skyscraper. But more than that, Toronto is also very unusual because it's a place where those neighborhoods, the kind of low-rise neighborhoods that I showed a minute ago, they come right into the city center. So you can see on the bottom right there is the edge of the central business district, and the big circle is low-rise single-family housing. And this is mostly because of an urban activist who came to Toronto, I think in the 70s, Jane Jacobs, who blocked a couple of big expressways that were planned to go right through the city center and eliminate these neighborhoods. And so her advocacy was successful, and we have this legacy. But what makes a good neighborhood is what I'm going to talk about, not just what is a neighborhood in Toronto or anywhere else. It's what are the ingredients that make that neighborhood. One of them is walkable streets, which is buildings that have principal entrances. Those entrances face walkable public spaces, streets, parks, plazas, and not just parking. Appealing streets as well, which minimize street frontage, no parking garages or limited parking garages, limited curb cuts, and a pedestrian life that's not faced by constant service and cross traffic. Another ingredient is block size. Humans walk at about 80 meters a minute. And if you end up walking for more than a couple of minutes without a break in the street wall against you, that begins to feel oppressive. So setting up a correct block size is very important. And another one of these ingredients is human scale. So what we have a lot of discussion about in Toronto is this street wall, which is an expression of that human scale. And that is related to the size of the width of the street and the size of the wall against you, so that you feel a human size scale of enclosure. Streets and natural surveillance are also important. So active uses, which are facing streets, doors, windows, mixtures of public and semi-private spaces, overlook, is much more important to have this sort of basic ingredient of human existence, natural surveillance, rather than living within barbed wire fences in the long term. Temporal context, as we were watching that plenary session this morning, that really great project in Singapore, I was reminded of how depressing it can be to work in Toronto as an architect because of the climate. So I remember when I was at university, I always wished that I lived in California and I could have all the single glazed buildings. But the truth is that the climate in Toronto is quite varied. It's about approximately equal with Milan or northern Italy, with northern Spain as well, and it varies quite considerably. So I think it's important in all places, but especially in somewhere that has a huge degree of climate change, is temporal context. This is a very sort of small example of converting something which in the winter wouldn't be possible to something in the summer, but having a sense of response to climate, which can be other things. Could be canopies, it could be things that block the wind, provide shade, or any number of things like that are very important to creating livable neighborhoods. And this is from Rio de Janeiro, actually, is a sort of an urban park, which are very popular there. But an idea that neighborhoods are places for everybody. They're not just places for a single demographic. So we've been talking about this. We've come up with a sort of a depressing version of what we want to design for, which is from cradle to coffin. So not just for teenagers, not just for people who are aging, but for the entire life cycle. Sustainable design is a phrase which is never far from anyone's lips, but most of the time it's just in the context of a building. It's important to identify what a sustainable neighborhood is and why this is so important to us. One of the main things about sustainable neighborhoods or sustainable design of any kind is to reduce the dependence on the car. And you can see the kind of emission ratios that we get from using private vehicles is 55% compared to the kind of emissions from natural gas or electricity are less than, don't even add up to that. And, in Toronto, we've recently banned those light bulbs. We've banned the normal light bulbs, which now have to be compact fluorescent light bulbs. And so they give off this kind of really dim light, and it's sort of annoying. But when you see this sort of scale of how you really can reduce the amount of carbon emissions that you can save by taking transit to work is more than all of those other things combined, much more than replacing light bulbs, much more than changing your refrigerator. And there's an additional benefit to that, which this slide is put out by the Toronto Transit Commission. It was put on Facebook actually in about 2009, although I think you can see from the cars there that it probably was taken a lot before that, maybe in the mid-80s. This shows the incremental effect. So if you take those cars, you turn them into people, you take those people, put them all together, that's the size of one streetcar. So all of those cars are really the same size as one streetcar. So the benefits of not driving are also mirrored by the benefits in lack of congestion, which we also all suffer from. Recently, in 2009, the US Green Building Council put out this system called Lead for Neighborhood Design, which I'm going to touch on briefly. I think this could probably form a whole presentation in itself, but if I just talk about a few things, I think it will understand the principles that we're talking about. So this Lead for Neighborhood Design was put out in 2009. 2010, it was adapted by the Canada Green Building Council for Canadian interests, and it features three kind of basic elements, which are smart location and linkage, which is the one SLL there, and that's the ratios of how it weighs. Neighborhood pattern and design, which is what to build. The smart linkage and smart location and linkage is about where to build. Neighborhood pattern design is about what to build, and then green infrastructure and building is how to manage the environmental impact. There's also a couple of other ones there, which is innovation and design process, which is the 6 points, and the regional priority credit. That one's not available in Canada. But there's a whole system here which tells you how to get points for all of these things so that you can, in the same way that you would get a LEED rating for a building, can now get it for a much bigger scale, and then consequently more impact. There's also a kind of a stage criteria that you have. So there's a stage 1 approval for this, which is when you have your outline plan. So you need it to get funding, to get stakeholder buy-in. And then there's a stage 3, which is the completed plan. There's also stage 2, which I'm going to mention again in a minute, which is, because it's so new, and master plans and big complex projects take so long, a lot of them were sort of done with the right principles, but done before the codification of this was complete, so you can get a sort of retroactive credit for it. Toronto, like Shanghai, is finding a huge need to provide accommodation for people, and there's very few big sites left. When you look out of the window here, you don't see big sites, but when you drive, although what seemed to be an eternity was actually an hour, we drove outside, and there's farmland, leftover industrial uses which are within the reach of the city. In North America, we're developing a lot of these, and they're former suburban conditions, but they're becoming urbanized, and we call these urburbs. This is one. You just saw Anthony Wood gave a presentation of which featured this building here. It's not one of our buildings, but it's quite well known, the Absolute Towers, in a city called Mississauga, which is a former bedroom community. Now is something like Canada's 7th largest city, almost 1 million people just in this suburb. And what it famously did was to eliminate the height restrictions and allow anybody to build right in the city center to try and create a sense of urbanity. You can see in the bottom right what the existing fabric was, and then the other tall buildings are what's happened really in just over the past 10 years. And we did one of these first projects. This project was the first project which not only brought that kind of high density, but also brought a strong sense of urbanity to it. It brought a relationship to the street. It brought commercial space which was right at street level. So rather than a kind of tower in the park format. And all of this is about 1,500 units. Another one of slightly less height, but something which is ongoing in our office, is a project called Downtown Markham. Markham is a very well-connected city with China. I think is a twin city of the Yangpu district, and is home to a lot of Chinese expats in the Toronto region. It's a 250-acre mixed-use community, which is arranged around a very good linkage of transit. You can see on the right there that sort of green circle and double lines. That's a ground-level train service. There's a big highway at the bottom. There's a bus rapid transit station right in the middle. And it looks something like this, which is a series of residential buildings, commercial buildings, mixed-use buildings. There's a hotel there. There's a new office building, which we're doing under construction. And to the bottom right, even a sports facility, a big hockey arena. But what it's really about is this. It's about this kind of walkable streets. It's about places for people to inhabit. It's not about a massive amount of density isolated from human experience. And another project which is in the earlier stages, so the one in Markham has been going on for a few years. The master plan's been done for a while, and we're gradually building it out. The absorption rate of the kind of Toronto market is, even though there is that same growth, it's still proportionately smaller. So it takes 10 years to build out something of that scale, at least. This project is in a similar condition, which is a city called Vaughan, also strong Chinese connections. I think all the Toronto suburbs are twinning themselves with Shanghai districts. But you can see here how the design of this is predicated, which is on a series of connections, a strong hierarchy of pedestrian, vehicular connections. There's public transit here, and it connects through at the ground plane. So the design evolution of this is all about the ground plane. And this one on the left, you can see there, that's the one I took actually quite a lot of flack from the Vaughan Planning Department. They didn't like that I just dotted in the towers. And while I did, think they were very interested in them. I didn't want them to get distracted by the towers, because the truth is that the tower could be 40 stories, it could be 45 stories, it could be 30 stories, and isn't really going to make that much difference to the overall condition. What makes a difference is the things which aren't dotted. So once we get that right, once we have this series of pedestrian connections, of pathways, of bioswales, of planting with indigenous species, then we can negotiate whether it's going to be 38 or 37 stories, and nobody will ever know the difference anyway. And similarly, this is the ground level condition. So you can see the trees, the walkable areas, the retail, there's residential on the side streets that bleeds out, and the towers are somewhere above. So although a lot of this work is much sort of easier to start from in the beginning in a much more open condition, there's also the urban condition which presents itself, and somewhere that we need to work quite hard at. This is a project that was an exploration about 13 years ago it began, and I believe that a lot of the explorations that were done in this project have gone on to inform what have become the basis for a lot of Toronto's urban design. So things like the tower sizes, things like street walls, things like spacing between buildings. These have all become codified into what's now currently proposed. And it uses the same principles that I've talked about. So it's located immediately adjacent to that sort of big weird shape thing at the top, which is Fort York, which was built in the early 1800s and is basically Toronto's oldest settlement. So you can imagine that sort of heritage element has a huge influence on any kind of building close to it. You know, we saw the cheese grater earlier, which leans back from St. Paul's. The restrictions aren't quite that oppressive, but there is a lot of interest in reducing the impact of the mass, in remaining enough sky so you don't feel like you're in the middle of a very high density area. It's home to about 5,000 residential units, which is quite a lot, and the street, that you see in the middle, Bathurst, is the edge of the downtown core, so it's very much in the city center. What we did after establishing a hierarchy of streets and street widths was to locate and determine these base heights. So I talked about street walls and human-scaled experience as you walk through it. There's a number of streets here, some of which, the one on the south in particular, you can see is quite wide, is a big arterial road. But through the middle of the blocks are what are called mews, which are very much intended to be small-scale, intimate streets. So the base heights that we've proposed along there reflect that. These asterisks are the location of the towers, which, as I mentioned, there was a lot of, this is a very iterative process. Is it too tall? Should we move it up? Should we move it down? Should we move it left? Should we move it right? And that's entirely based on, firstly, the relationship between the two in order to provide light and sky. So when you're in Fort York, you look up and you see sky. You don't just look up and see street wall or tower wall. But this is what it mostly is about, is the lower levels. This is one of the buildings. This one is only 15 stories. It's not one of the taller ones, but it has a very strong articulated wall at the street level. It has front doors which face the streets. It has places where people sit. So as you walk down the street, you see your friend sitting on his porch. You park your bike there. You walk into the building, and there's the intimacy of human experience is there, even though the building is tall. And this is a similar condition for the taller buildings as well. So this high-density community has all the same important elements as the low-rise ones that I've shown, but significantly more people. Toronto's taken some of the conclusions from this, as I mentioned, and codified that into the ongoing urban design ideas that permeate our efforts. The avoidance of gated towers, gated communities and towers in the park, which is what we see so prevalent elsewhere, I think is a huge success in this project for the legacy of Toronto, which did through the 60s establish many towers in the park, like we see in other areas of the world, and is now under efforts to fix that problem. So in conclusion, what I'm going to say is when it comes to making a great city, the most important thing is design at an urban level, an understanding of the buildings, relationship to and role in the broader urban fabric. If you have good architects, you get beautiful buildings. If you have bold architects, you get memorable buildings. But neither of those will necessarily cause you to have a great city. That's it. Thank you very much.